Chapter 2, Legal and Ethical Aspects of Nursing. Okay, here are our lesson objectives here. You can find this chapter in your textbook where you have copies right now, but it is on page 22. And there are objectives 1 through 16 there that you can do. These lay out for you what's in the chapter. So it just kind of gives an overall of the structure and function of the legal system, how negligence and malpractice differ, the legal relationships that exist between nurse and patient, explaining the importance of maintaining standards of care, giving examples of ways that nursing professionals are regulated. We've talked about some of these last week, and legal issues that we see in healthcare. Here's some continuing on federal regulations. HIPAA, we all know about HIPAA. Examples of LVNs how you can avoid to get a lawsuit, to be sued. Differentiating between a legal duty and an ethical duty. Explaining advanced directives, such as, full code and DNR. Summarizing how cultural affects of individuals' beliefs, morals, and values. And some more here, identifying how values affect decision making, distinguish between ethical and unethical behaviors, explain the meaning of code of ethics, explaining the nurse roles in reporting unethical behavior, giving examples of ethical issues common in healthcare. And these are things that we're going to talk about throughout our program. Okay, laws. They prescribe how a person should act in society. These are exactly like the laws that we follow, causing harm to other people's property or to other people's person, stealing, all of the laws that we follow, the traffic laws that we follow, stopping at red lights, all of those things. So we have our own set of laws that we are governed by and that we follow. Sanction acceptable behavior and prohibit unacceptable behavior. Yes, so we want to promote. I told you we have a higher standard that we have to stay at because we are capable of around vulnerable people, and so we want to make sure that we have accountability there. Providing protection for all members of the healthcare system. So this is checks put in place, checks and balance systems so that you are not left vulnerable. I told you when we were on camp in the clinical at the hospital, I am there as your advocate but you have to make sure that I know what's going on. Overall of the legal system. So this is on page 23 if you want to follow along in your book. And this is describing what criminal law. So criminal cases are resolved with findings of guilty or innocence. Okay, they may result in fines or incarceration or a combination of both. Where civil law is different. That is matters that conclude to be determined on the accountability of innocence. So usually this is monetary settlements assigned based on the type of liability assessed. So civil law and criminal laws are established in one of two ways. Federal, state, and local governments develop statutory law, and then common law is the other one. So it evolves in response to specific legal questions that come before the court and usually follow precedent. So just so you can look at those, and they're just definitions of what type of laws we have. Examples of criminal cases would be like killing somebody, that would be murder, right? Civil law would be like suing them for not keeping up with their like if it was a doctor that they were suing, they would say that they did not follow their obligations as a doctor and they gave them purposely like a wrong medication. So you can sue someone both in criminal, they can be found guilty, and then you can sue them in civil case, and you can get a monetary at the end result, monetary result, depending on what the crime is. Malpractice. Okay, you hear about malpractice insurance. You guys had to get malpractice insurance for the school. Refers to professional negligence. Nursing responsibilities include actions taken as well as omitted. Must contain 4 key elements. So if you are being accused of malpractice, these 4 elements need to be proven. So this is why this is important for you to understand, right? Because if you're being accused of doing something wrong, then you want to know what it is I need to do to not be sued for malpractice. Also in box 2.1, there's more examples of criminal and civil there. So the duty refers to the established relationship between the patient and the nurse. Okay, breach is of duty is failure to perform the duty is reasonable, prudent manner. So say you did not give a blood pressure medication and the person had a stroke because their blood pressure went up. That could be seen as malpractice. Harm has occurred. This does not have to be physical injuries, can be chemical. And the fourth one is breach of duty was proximate cause of the harm. So the occurrence of harm depended directly on the occurrence of the breach. So this is very, very critical. When you accept your assignment, you are entering into that relationship of nurse-patient relationship. So it's very important for you to have a positive relationship, and because there's going to be opportunities where it's difficult to, like, the family is difficult to communicate with, the patient themselves. So we'll talk about that more. Accountability, yeah, that's what I was telling you about, the checks and balances. We have safeties in place so that, like drugs, opioids, that whatnot, that's to keep accountability. You might have to witness for someone. Every time you give insulin, you have to have a witness, and you have to witness for others. Liability, legal relationships. That's, again, the nurse-patient relationship. You will hear me talk about this constantly. When the nurse assumes responsibility for the patient's care and failure to provide care to the expected levels of expertise gives rise to legal liability. Advocate. What is an advocate? I advocate for my patient when I advocate for my friend that I told you all about. Jared, he is quadriplegic, so I advocate for him when I'm talking to healthcare agencies, healthcare providers, other places. I want to make sure that his needs and desires and like basic living needs are met. So because it's very difficult for him being fully vent dependent and physically dependent on others. So this is one will defend or plead a cause or issue on behalf of another. The cause accepts the role of advocate for the patient. A nurse advocate has a legal and ethical obligation to safeguard the patient's interests. Standards of care, acts that are not permitted to be performed. Give directions to the practicing nurse, defines what can or cannot be done to patients. Every nurse is obligated to know and follow the established standards of care. Failure to adhere to the standards give rise to legal liability. Okay, so that's just, keeping what that's our outline. Scope of nursing practice coupled with standards of care. This gives direction to the practicing nurse. So we have our scope of practice. This is something you also hear over and over and over again. This means that we don't, for instance, pass narcotics through an IV line because that is out of our scope of practice as LVNs. Follow the laws of individual states. So I told you that each state has a board and you have to follow the laws per that board. You can't just say, well, I went to school in California and that's how I know the law. If you have a license in Arizona as well, as I do, because we're right on the border, then you will have to make sure that you know what the laws of Arizona are. Defines the obligations of the nurse, including prohibited standards. Same thing, it's following the laws. Like, you know what you can do and you know what you are not allowed to do. There are differences between California and Arizona, so we go into those in detail later. It is the nurse's responsibility to know the specific Nurse Practice Act in the states he or she practices in. Institution has the right to establish policies and procedures for nursing within the Nurse Practice Act. Legal issues. Statutory and common law can both play important roles in the defining of rights of others. We talked about patients' rights, the patient's Bill of Rights, informed consent. What is informed consent? This is found on page 27, and it is saying that the patient has the right to make decisions regarding his or her health care. Our job is to fully inform them. We want to give them as much information as possible. Always, knowledge is power. And then we let them make a decision. If they ask us for further information, if they have more questions, if they have, you go from there. But that is our duty to provide them with that. And then maybe they need to talk to the doctor more if it's a surgery that's coming up, whatever that is. Confidentiality, that says what it is, right? We do not ever share any information. We are bound by law. It is even within nursing, like nurse to nurse, it is what is needed only. You don't need to say other parts of the person's personal, physical health, whatever. If you're having a nurse that's helping you, you can explain what is necessary for that help. Medical records, very serious in a court of law. That is a legal document, and you are very closely held to a standard of confidentiality in protecting of those medical records, invasion of privacy, reporting abuse. Back in the 80s, this was a big issue. We now have put lots of awareness and attention on keeping people's invasion of privacy, but this still is violated. So, as to caution you, we live here in a small community in Blythe, so you absolutely don't share any information. HIPAA. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. This is healthcare institution is obligated to uphold certain provisions to the patient. It's the right to have care without prejudice, the right to be treated with respect and dignity, the right to confidentiality, personal safety, and to complete information about one's own condition and treatment. You can't get full. Imagine yourself if you were trying to get treatment for something and it's embarrassing if maybe it's a procedure you had, or maybe you have something like an STD or something like that, and it's not something that you want to share, so you don't share it because you're afraid that people are going to not respect your privacy. That would possibly prohibit the healthcare provider, like the doctor, from giving you the correct care. So we never, ever, ever want to be in any part participating in that. We want to make sure that we always, always uphold the confidentiality and letting the patient know. And there's lots of documents involved with HIPAA that everybody has to sign whenever you go into a place to say that should always tell us that, we don't share this information. How to avoid a lawsuit. I would like to always know that, right? Provide compassionate, competent nursing care. Nurse-patient relationship must be one based on trust and respect. Yes. So you start the ball rolling in that, how you present yourself. Use of open and honest communication. Maintaining and adhering to the standards of care and scope of practice. The Good Samaritan Law. This provides immunity from lawsuits in certain circumstances. Proper documentation. If it's not charted, it wasn't done. Also, this is something you will always hear. You must chart. It's a legal document. So if you did not chart it, it wasn't done. You can't just assume, well, of course I discontinued the catheter before they went home. No, you have to document that you discontinued a catheter on the patient, that there was no complications, that, what you say, what you removed in detail so that it's documented and nothing, the patient didn't say that something was left behind. They got an infection, they got sick, they came back. That's just a small example, but there's hundreds of examples of harm that can cause because we did not chart and then somebody came behind us and they either gave someone double medication or anything like that. So make sure that you always chart everything you do. Insurance, this is just so you have two types: claims made policy and occurrence basis policy. This is liability insurance. Disciplinary defense insurance. We are lawsuit was on page 31, and insurance is on page 32. Okay, so you can read these in your textbook. Defining ethics. What are ethics? So ethics refers to the values that influence a person's behavior and the individual's feelings and beliefs about what is right or wrong. It's basically, so we all have a different set of ethics. We, as nurses, we try to have a uniformed, but where you come from, where your family, what your family background is, where, how you were raised, all of those things do define how we come up with our ethics, and they evolve. You are a child and you're taught one way, but then you become an adult and your core ethics should be, what you believe to be right and wrong. But maybe, some children are raised in a very dysfunctional, abusive, not healthy environment. So their ethics change, and they believing what's right and wrong changes as they become adults and they're exposed to other more healthy situations. So just take into consideration, for nursing, what ethical aspects, and we talk about that again ongoing. So two types, or just having the idea of what does ethics mean is what you need to know. Advanced directives, there's two types. There's a living will and there's a durable power of attorney. So you can write a living will for yourself and saying, like, this is what I would like when I become sick, or I'm not able to speak for myself. And you can assign someone to be your durable power of attorney. If I was in a car accident and I became quadriplegic, I would have someone that I trusted be my durable power of attorney, because I would not want someone speaking for me that I didn't, trust completely. So that's just what that's talking about. They're going to make health conditions, they're speaking for you, basically. Through the law, recognizes them as somebody that you assign that they can just answer for you. The Patient Self-Determination Act in 1991 requires all healthcare institutions to provide written information to patients regarding their right to make decisions about their health care. Okay, development of ethical principles. This is defining values, define value clarification, and define ethical dilemmas. Okay, so we're moving over to page 34 and 35. This is like in box 211. What would you do? So there's some scenarios there, and you can, read through those and just question. It's like something you want to ask yourself. What would I do in this case? I think you're asked when you do your interview for the program, what would you do if you walked by and you saw a CNA standing, so it's your peer, and you saw them stealing from a patient and putting valuables, money from the patient's drawer into their pocket? What would you do? So this is a ethical dilemma, right? Do you want to tell on them and like put it out there, and then you're going to have to confront them? You have to think about that for a second, or do you just automatically say that's wrong? And what if it was my loved one? Would I want somebody stealing from them? Well, no, I wouldn't. So it's just something that is a thought process that you're going to go through. We all, always want to remember we are an advocate for this patient. So, always following the proper channels and turning them in, that's the best thing to do. And if you're transparent about that, like I've always said that, I'll totally narc on you. Don't ever put me, like if you always say that up front, like in a way that people know, like, oh no, they follow the book, like then you have less opportunity to be put in a situation where they're like, come on, just don't say anything. That's how you can kind of help. But sometimes it doesn't matter. You can do all that and people still put you in a bad position. You have to just say, no, my license is not worth your whatever you're asking me. Ethical principles in nursing practice. So most fundamental principle is respect for people. Yes, that is what we do in nursing, the basic foundation, respect and caring for people. Autonomy is the freedom of personal choice. Beneficence is acting for someone's good. Non-malfeasance is means to do no harm. And justice, concept of what is fair. Definitions here. Nurses have a duty to report behavior witnessed that does not meet the established standards. Just what I gave you an example of. Always follow the proper chain of command. If you saw someone doing that, you wouldn't call the CEO of the company. You would go to your direct supervisor, right? There is a proper chain of command. It's very much like similar to police or military. And we definitely follow, even here on campus, something you follow the chain of command. You don't go straight to the top person and say, like, and they're going to say, well, did you talk to your supervisor? No, because this is such a big deal. Well, you have to follow the proper chain of command, and then that's just the process that we follow. Ethical issues. Change as society changes. Practitioner assisted suicide, refusal to treat, and do not resuscitate orders. These are some of the ethical issues that we talk about. And that is the end of that. So, do not resuscitate is an order that is written, and it is by the person's, per the patient's or their power of attorney to what their wishes are. It's a DNR status, means that it's an advance directive. At this stage, the patient is usually anticipating that little that they can't recover, right, basically. So they don't want to be kept alive on a ventilator and a feeding tube. They often will say just comfort measures. So they'll say, like, give me just pain medication or oxygen, but I don't want you to do CPR on me. I don't want you to put a feeding tube in me. If I can't eat anymore, then just let my body go. So that's what that is. Refusal to treat is care that requires a nurse to do something that conflicts with his or her personal moral beliefs. A typical example would be in caring for a woman having an abortion. There's a legal right to an abortion, but this does not establish whether abortion is morally right or wrong. So your ethics are involved here. If the nurse has a strong moral or religious belief regarding abortion, these concerns must be communicated with the appropriate supervisor. Do not abandon your patient ever. Instead, ask for another assignment. Remember that the right to disqualify oneself from assisting with an abortion does not extend to the complete ability to avoid caring for the patient after the abortion. Meaning you might not be participating in that part of it, but you might be able to participate in aftercare. Disagreement with care decisions made by patients does not allow the nurse to refuse to care for them. So this is very something that you have to make sure you are following the proper channels, and because it does get into that is the most widely ethical conflict that nurses and patients might face is abortion. Practice assisted suicide. This is healthcare professional and patient advocate groups on both sides are debating the ethics. So it's called physician assistant. So this is basically like when someone has cancer and they're done with treatment because they are at the end of their, like, they've tried. This is maybe their third time to have cancer, and it's now all over their body, and they decide that they don't want to go on, and they would like to have a physician assist them in maybe having an injection so that they can go ahead and just, it's taking death more in their control. They don't just wait till their body gives out. They want to help it to go faster. So it's an active euthanasia. and a healthcare provider will take an active role in ending a patient's life. So that goes, there's lots of laws and that go into that. That's not something that there's both an argument on both sides to that. So that's something that is a good debating, discussing behavior, something that our issue, and we will talk about that as we go on in our discussions, our class discussions. Okay, that's chapter 2.